Good afternoon and welcome everyone to Network 2020's discussion about Reconstruction and Ukraine. For those who might be joining us for the first time, I'll just give a brief introduction to Network 2020. We are a New York City-based nonprofit, and we provide access to leading thinkers and doers who are working in the international affairs realm for our audiences in New York and around the world. We're really trying to create more informed conversations about global affairs. Today, we will be looking at the future of Ukraine, a country still at war, but with the immediate need to adapt and rebuild. And so I am very pleased that we are joined by three experts who are very close to this issue in different capacities. First, we have Eric Hontz. He leads the Center for International Private Enterprises Center for Accountable Investment, which examines the impact of investment on democratic and market institutions. He is frequently featured in media as an expert on economic reform and policy in Ukraine and other former Soviet states. So welcome, Eric. We have Tetyana Korotka. She is the Deputy Business Ombudsman of the Business Ombudsman Council in Ukraine. She has over 20 years of experience working in governance and development across sectors with a specific interest in inclusive growth and sustainable infrastructure development. So welcome, Tetyana. And lastly, I am pleased to welcome Michael Newson. He is the Senior Program Coordinator for the Migration and Sustainable Development Unit of the International Organization for Migration in Ukraine, where he works on programs related to economic development and labor market engagement of IDPs and displaced businesses, diaspora engagement and economic recovery and development, and labor and migration governance. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here on a rather auspicious anniversary, or just past the anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So it's hard to believe it's been 2 years. Tetyana, I'd like to start with you. So as the third rapid damage and needs assessment is being finalized, could you just walk us through what are some of the most immediate areas of need for Ukraine? And I think also for our audience, just to set the stage, why is beginning reconstruction or working on reconstruction while the war is the outcome of the war is the war still ongoing, the outcome is unknown? Why is it in the best interest of Ukraine and its allies? And couldn't one argue that the outcome should be known before starting on costly reconstruction? So a lot of questions kind of packaged into one, but if you could kindly set the stage for us, please.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much, Courtney, and your colleagues for inviting me to speak and to explain the situation and meet your audience. It's a great honor for me to be here today. As for the question, yes, there is no secret that Ukraine significantly depends on the international support right now because our economy is under incredible pressure. It's difficult even to realize that well, in 21st century, yes, we have certain damage without the natural disaster, yes, because of the people disaster. That's why in order to ensure there is recovery and future stabilization, we need to begin reconstruction right now. And I would highlight two aspects of this process that definitely also reflect the answer of your questions regarding the priorities. Yeah, so like also let me answer a little bit like in complex. First of all, it's the stabilization of region. Why we need to stabilize the region, because we should rebuild infrastructure, we should recover logistics, we should also provide revitalization and the mining of the region. And all together, it will provide also economic recovery to the region, to Ukraine, but also to neighbors countries and countries, our partners, our commercial partners. So, and the second aspect is definitely humanitarian needs. We need housing for people. We need water provision, I don't know, energy provision, a life provision, actually, life system provision, all together. And both these aspects will help Ukraine build economic stability and economic resistance and security, future security. So we definitely have half of the territory, not more than half the territory, but western part of the territory more or less stable. And our businesses, as well as international partners, already know how to protect people and protect assets from these missiles attacks and potential war consequences. So it helped us produce goods, services, yes, create new job places, new attract back our people, yes, from other countries. So that's why actually in general the concept of the early revitalization and rebuilding of Ukraine. But for sure that we can't do everything right now. We should plan and divide assets and divide projects depending of the situation, yes, of security. So, and our government works on the plan, and actually the plan of recovery. There is some funding for this plan also will be provided based on the EU support. And maybe you know that just yesterday was approved the package 50 billion euro for Ukraine that's approved. So some part of these funding will be focused on recovery, for future recovery. Each big project should be well planned, well arranged, yes, well designed, yes, and people should be attracted, necessary companies, and in the future it will be a big opportunity for also international partners to participate in our recovery. So it should be synergetic effect, not just for Ukraine and Ukrainian citizens, but also for region and for the international businesses as well. And the last but not least idea of this recovery, it's a demonstration of our resilience and cooperation and support with international society. It's important from psychological point of view, but also maybe we can share our moral support to our neighbors, yes, to fight for the democracy and to demonstrate real values, yes, for the future development and bigger progress. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'm ready to answer questions, of course.
Thank you, Tetyana. I'd like to pull on a thread that you mentioned about people and turn to you, Michael, because people often think of reconstruction, or at least I do, in terms of rebuilding buildings or infrastructure. But with, I think it's about 6 million displaced people, Ukraine's workforce has, I think, something like a 22% reduction. What can you tell us about the role that people play in this equation? And what are some of the shifts that you are seeing in terms of people and human capital? And how does that factor into reconstruction?
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. Thanks for the question, and thanks for having me. It's a question that comes up quite often, actually. I was on a side panel a few months ago at the Rebuild Ukraine conference in Warsaw, and everyone was talking about how to finance reconstruction. And I was the only one on the panel who, as you point out, is concerned about the human capital factor. Who's actually going to do the reconstruction? And by that, I don't mean, which companies are going to be engaged, but who are the actual people on the ground that are going to be involved in reconstruction and economic recovery. Because I think it was known within the region, but internationally, it wasn't known that Ukraine was facing demographic challenges and labor market shortages even prior to the full-scale invasion. This was largely a result of decades of emigration to the Russian Federation, to Western Europe, but more recently actually to Eastern EU countries that were facing their own labor market shortages. And again, that's partly as a result of emigration towards Western EU countries. So you get a sort of domino effect of migration going on. But just to give some figures to give a sense of this, just looking at Poland, The number of first-time work permits that were given to Ukrainians in 2013 was 85,000. That had gone up to 545,000 by 2017 and up to almost 700,000 by 2021. So these are huge numbers of people who were obviously working age because they're getting work permits, leaving the Ukrainian labor market. So this already, even prior to the invasion, was creating demographic decline and labor market shortages in specific regions of Ukraine and in specific sectors. But now, as you know, we have an additional 6.4 million, I think, Ukrainians who are currently internationally displaced, which obviously creates future pressure as well when it comes to talking about reconstruction and recovery. So the majority of those who have left are working age women and children. So if a large number of refugees decide to remain abroad permanently, this represents a significant blow to Ukraine's labor market, not just in the short term, but over decades, because you're talking about people who would be in the labor market and people who in the future would have been in the labor market who will no longer be there. But in addition to, I think, those that have gone internationally, one other point is that those who have left tend to be, on average, better educated as well. So you're looking at sort of a sort of brain drain of Ukrainians as well that are in the EU and Canada and elsewhere now. That obviously puts a damper on economic recovery as well. But in addition to international displacement, you also have about 3.6 million people who are displaced internally. And one of the problems with that is, sorry, I had a note here. Lost my notes. So yeah, internally displaced persons. So for a variety of reasons as well, IDPs tend to have low rates of engagement in the labor market. This has to do with where they're going to. It has to do with different skills mismatches. It has to do with expectations that they're going to return to the place where they've been, so they're not going to look to get a job. So this is another real challenge that ends up displacing people from the labor market and reducing the labor market supply in Ukraine. So we've recently done, or we're in the process of doing, a survey with the Ministry of Economy, a survey of employers. It's not complete, but we've got about 2,200 responses from across employers in Ukraine. 40% of employers are already saying that they face labor market shortages and they can't identify people with the skills that they need. If you look at the applications to job vacancies ratio, it's at about where it was prior to the full-scale invasion, which was extremely low. It's about 3 applications per vacancy, which is very low. Obviously, it varies significantly depending on sector and occupation, but it's a big issue. So in the immediate term, if we're looking to begin reconstruction and recovery, as we should in certain locations of Ukraine, we need to look at what we can do to improve labor market participation rates of individuals who tend to be less represented in the labor market. For IOM, obviously, we're a migration agency. We're looking primarily at IDPs and how we can create job opportunities for IDPs. And then another key problem, I think, when it comes to looking at the migration that's happening in Ukraine is where the mobility is happening. So unlike typical economic immigration trends where you would see people going to where the jobs are, we're looking at forced movements where people are going to for reasons of safety and protection, not necessarily where the jobs are. So where people are going doesn't necessarily align where the job opportunities are. IDPs tend to relocate close to where they lived before. They tend to relocate where they know people, where housing is cheap because they think it's a temporary situation. And that tends to be in towns and rural communities, which is where 60% of IDPs are. But that's not where the jobs are. So if you look at the employment rate of IDPs in urban areas, it's about 45%. If you look at rural areas, it's about 25%. So there's a huge gap there. And we see the same with people who are returning to their communities of origin. These tend to be communities that are sort of closer to the front lines, that are not necessarily ready for reconstruction and recovery and don't have job opportunities. So I think a lot of the issues that we're looking at and that we're looking to solve it in the short term is how can we encourage IDPs and returnees to actually move to where the job opportunities are in Ukraine, because there are job opportunities and recovery is happening in some places, and there are job shortages. It's just a geographical mismatch that we're seeing as well. In terms of, I don't know how I'm doing for time, in terms of the longer term reconstruction plans, I think we can expect that there will be gaps in the labor market, and that can create a slowdown in reconstruction. It can create added price tags, obviously, if there's wage inflation in certain occupations with reconstruction, and that can be expected to a certain extent. I think the good news, though, is that the government is very aware of these issues, and they're already working with us. They're working with ILO. They're working with other agencies to try to address these issues head on.
Right.
I'll stop.
Thank you. Okay. No, that's great. A lot of great numbers in there, and excellent points about mismatches in terms of where people are locating and where the jobs are. Eric, you've written that the private sector is and will be the key in rebuilding Ukraine. Why is this? And is this typical in an ongoing conflict situation that the private sector would be so key? And just because I like to package multiple questions, how does rebuilding in an ongoing war zone impact the willingness of the private sector, particularly internationally, to get on board?
Yeah, so all good questions, several packed into one. So look, it's complicated, and first and foremost, the private sector is the bulk of any economic activity in most nations around the world. It's natural that the private sector should be taking the lead. If you're like me and happen to believe that markets are a bit of a magical thing, and we have 40 million Ukrainians trying different things every day to make things work and provide services and to provide products that people want to buy, then you have this dynamism. And I will say that prior to the full-scale invasion in February 22, we had two types of economy in Ukraine, and one was the one that you hear about or read about with the constant refrains. You read in the Wall Street Journal with the oligarchs, etc. And that was the zero growth or zero sum economy. And then there was another private sector that was a positive sum private sector, and these are the firms in the IT space, in small electronic manufacturing. So Ajax security company is a big manufacturer of security systems from Ukraine, both the software side and the hardware side. And these are really, they've identified their niche as a fairly low cost, offering a solid product at a fair price that is not necessarily affiliated with an authoritarian regime, coming from a democratic country. And that was a pretty valuable proposition for Ukrainian companies, particularly in those dual use and sensitive areas. Going forward, I think that there's going to be a big attention to those dual use technologies that Ukraine is using on the front today. I would also, note that Ukraine is a rather large European country. It's smaller by the size of by the scale of the United States, but it's still the size of Texas, right? And Texas as its own territory is quite large, and it's also oval shaped. And so we have the western third of the country, which does experience alarms, it does experience strikes every now and then. But if you're talking about fixed capital asset investment into that third of the country, okay, I mean that's going to be one level of risk tolerance. If you're going to invest in downtown Kyiv, again, fairly well protected, fairly well covered by air defenses, maybe you're talking about fixed capital investment. As you creep closer to the actual front lines, obviously there's a different type of risk tolerance there, and your investor profile is going to change. Internationally, you have things like the 3Cs initiative, which is a initiative by a number of governments in Central and Eastern Europe that's looking to kind of collect capital for infrastructure investment projects throughout Central and Eastern Europe to connect those 3Cs. Now we can add a fourth C to that with the addition to Ukraine. And if we could create structures and investment products that allow riskier projects in Ukraine to be coupled with those in Poland or in Czechia or in Romania, we have members inside and outside of the EU. Then we diversify our risk pool and create a single investment product. We're investing in Ukraine, but also diversifying that risk away from Ukraine. Finance is a very innovative industry. There's always a way to find out to move that capital if we create the right product and that the market will accept. On the human capital, I completely agree with Michael that there were shortages, labor shortages prior to the full-scale invasion in February of 22, and that's going to continue. But you do have answers with automation and scaling or with rather robotics. Again, that plays naturally to Ukrainians' strengths. They're very strong programmers, very strong robotics companies, and as I do travel to Asia occasionally, I'm in Seoul, I'm in Tokyo, and South Korean, Japanese firms are looking at Ukraine as a manufacturing hub, as a distribution point, jumping off into the EU, or conversely, on the other side of the border in Poland, and then importing and exporting into the EU via Ukraine. The government plans always make me nervous, and so I think that the Ukrainian government during wartime has had this centralizing aspect, as it should. You're engaging in military hostilities. You have to have that central control. But to me, one of the strengths over the past 10 years has been the decentralization in Ukraine, where you have local authority, local regulation, and local incentives because of the tax structure to make your oblast, your town, the most hospitable to investment. And I think that that's really where the opportunities are going to lie, at the oblast level, not necessarily coming out of Kiev. Ukraine, again, to kind of capitalize on to reemphasize that the size of the country, it is a nation of small and medium-sized enterprises. And there's going to need to be capital in that traditional private equity sense to do roll-ups, where you have 500 small businesses all operating within the same industry, where you could realize economies of scale if there were that capital that would roll up those businesses into a single entity to deploy those scale opportunities and provide lower costs and press down that inflation that's always present in Ukraine, pushing things up. The last part about security is that, again, I have been to Seoul, a few times over the past couple of years, and it's an amazing city, and it also sits a few dozen kilometers from the DMZ, and you have a magnificent city that built back. If you look at the post-Korean photos from Seoul, it's just, I don't think there was a single kilometer of railway in the country, and now we have just two generations of activity, economic growth in South Korea, and it rivals any other country in the world. And if we turn to Ukraine and say, well, what's to say in 2 generations that we cannot have an economy that looks like South Korea, with massive growth, massive opportunity in infrastructure, to bring back and to rise up everyone in Ukraine to a modernized European economy.
Great. Thank you. I think that's a great point about potential models around the world to look at. And just as an aside, Network 2020 took a group to Ukraine, I believe in 2019, as part of our entrepreneurial diplomacy program. And we very much heard about what you were saying about that robust IT sector and just all the opportunities there and the high skill set. So thank you for mentioning that. Tetyana, turning to you, just looking at ensuring the feasibility of reconstruction. So investing in Ukraine now carries significant risks, as we talked about, and also geographically dependent, yet private market investment is crucial to rebuilding. So how can rebuilding Ukraine be opened up to the private market, and how is it being made safe for foreign companies? And what role does your organization play in maintaining integrity and safety for businesses and investors?
No, let's think realistically that private investors that would like to invest right now are mostly those investors who already used to work with Ukraine. They know Ukrainian market. They have assets here. They have well, organizational structure, or they neighboring or partnering with the investors who used to work with Ukraine. So it's more or less a company that aware about the situation and about business climate and the specific and so on. The new investors maybe we should expect after the war. Yes, so it's clear because higher scale investors would be interested in a more stable situation, insurance, and so on. As for the Business Ombudsman Council, where I'm working for, this organization was established in 2014, right after the Revolution of Dignity, as an answer or response of the international society and newly elected government and 5 biggest business associations, including key Ukrainian business associations, American Chamber of Commerce, and European business associations, especially to be to bridge the gap, I would say, to between businesses and state authorities, in order to help businesses to overcome corruption issues. Yes, because that was the main idea of our establishment. EBRD and OECD also helped us to establish Business Ombudsman Council. They signed Memorandum of Understanding with the Ukrainian government, and the key idea of this memorandum was establishing Business Ombudsman Council. So we're very independent or equally distant from three parties. Businesses, government, and international financial institutions. And our role is to help businesses to solve problematic issues in contacting with the state authorities, starting from very simple things like tax issues and finishing really with difficult law enforcement procedures. So starting from 2015, we already investigated more than 14,000 of cases. Yes, so there we have a like huge level return of investment. Yes, because our direct financial impact of our work is hundreds millions of dollars or euro. Yes, depending on the calculations, but I mean it's a huge amount, and we help businesses to obtain difficult type of permits, licenses, to sign necessary contract documents with the state authorities. I don't know, open a criminal procedure because of the special situation, or close criminal procedure depending on the case. So this is our role. We are working as a mediator. However, our staff consists of high-level, very professional lawyers, mostly from a Big Four and leading Ukrainian legal companies. Business Ombudsman, as a rule, it's an international person, yes, so it's expat. The first Business Ombudsman was the next European Commissioner, Algirdas Šemeta, so that is just for you understand that it's at a high level, yes, a political level. Currently, Business Ombudsman is an ex-ambassador of Canada to Ukraine, so also well known in Ukraine and all over the world in the diplomatic rounds and international society. So very reputable person, highly qualified. I begin working from the very beginning, from the scratch. So I don't know already what kind of specialist I am. So mostly policy dialogue, probably the main specialty, but I have economic background. So this is the role. And now we are like integrated platform for all type of initiatives of president or government or businesses to solve different type of issues. Yes, we are accumulating around us all this society, and we are able to manage our contacts and helping businesses in different ways. We also address some policy issues to the government or to the parliament, depending on the situation. And also the spectrum of these policy issues are very wide, starting from, I don't know, fixing certain issues in like, I don't know, construction area, or continue discussion regarding the tax issues, yes, but always touching different aspects of tax administration. And we are ready also to help during the reconstruction period. I should highlight that our supervisory board, headed by the managing director of EBRD to our region, they approved the new direction for us, helping businesses and providing this policy dialogue. It's definitely reconstruction in a wider meaning, as well as a European integration process. Definitely, we can cover everything, yes, so related to European integration, but well, economic issues, movement of capital, goods, and people as employers, yes, as employees. It's in the focus of the Business Ombudsman Council.
Terrific, thank you. And just as a reminder to those listening, if you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A box at any point. I'm just going to get in a couple more questions, and then we'll turn to the Q&A box. Eric, given your insights on the investment market in Ukraine and the current situation on the ground, what areas have the strongest combination of both need and opportunity for the private sector? I know you gave a bit of an overview of some of the different types of packaging, but I'd love some specifics on where you see the real opportunity and the real need lying.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of opportunity here, and I just, for the audience, it's not as if you read the paper and it's wars everywhere in Ukraine. The economy still works. Business people still go to work every day. They take the bus. They take the metro. The economy is still functioning and actually growing. And one sector which is highlighted in a number of places is the IT sector. And last year, I think it had 20 or 30% growth. I can't remember the final number. But it was really impressive that during wartime, the sector grew by such an amount. We have stories of investments that were paused on February 22, and European companies went ahead and purchased Ukrainian companies. So IT being the first and foremost, agriculture, of course, but also agricultural roll-ups. So, looking at, investing in Ukrainian agriculture, it's a bit different than European. It's more consolidated. I think it's larger in operation, and this is where we get into the issues along the Polish border, which have recently happened, because quite frankly, Europeans can produce a lot of agricultural products for a lot less money than it's much more competitive. And so I tell my European Union colleagues that Brussels is going to need to work out how to incorporate Ukraine, and not also it's a relationship. You have a large company of 40 million, an agricultural powerhouse, a brains powerhouse in terms of its IT capacity. I mean, Ukraine has a space program. We're not dealing with a country here that is exactly has an anemic economy. It has a lot of technical specialists. One other area which I don't think is mentioned very much is machine building, machine crafting, small parts manufacturing, and that's especially so after the war. As the economy retools away from war production towards consumer production, there are going to be a lot of hands that are available with specialized skills in everything from 3D manufacturing to machine operation. which are valuable skills, both in the European Union, but also in Ukraine itself. So I think I'll stop there with those three. Thank you.
Great points. Michael, last question. We talked a little bit earlier about the mismatch between IDPs and some of the jobs that are in Ukraine. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about what IOM is doing in particular to, I know you mentioned what your outreach is within the country, but also abroad in terms of whether or not you see an opportunity to bring people back to Ukraine and what can be done to fill Ukraine's manpower gap when skilled workers and laborers are not available in enough numbers.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a good question. We're not at the moment as IOM or UNHCR in a position where we're trying to encourage return of Ukrainians. We don't think that, particularly in the locations that a lot of them are coming from, that they're able to engage in sustainable return. So it's not something that we're promoting, although we're aware that it's something that's of keen interest to the government of Ukraine, and something that in the longer term we recognize is for the benefit of the country as well. So we are looking at building programs with the government to make it more likely that those who are displaced internationally will eventually return to Ukraine as well. We know that historically, the longer groups stay displaced, the more likely they are to remain displaced, even when things are safe in the country of origin. The government of Ukraine knows that as well. It's a concern for them. I do think there's room to be optimistic in Ukraine from some of the data that we've seen. For example, I think in the first year and a half after the full-scale invasion, we were getting regular weekly and bi-weekly information from Facebook on mobility of Ukrainians out of Ukraine. And if you see the first weeks and months of the war, they were looking at secondary movements as well. And you could see that the movements were going Ukraine, Poland, Germany, Ukraine, Slovakia, Czech Republic, for example. That changed very quickly and everything became pendular. It became Ukraine, Poland, Ukraine, Poland, Ukraine, Poland, Ukraine, Slovakia, Ukraine. So you've got all this movement that's happening already during wartime that gives a sense of the strong ties that remain between Ukrainians who have gone abroad and their communities of origin. So I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic that we will see a higher rate of return of Ukrainians after the war than we see in other types of conflicts. But there's also certain things that governments and the international community can do to enhance return as well. It's not like it's a given that X percentage are going to return and X percentage are going to remain. We can do things that reduce the financial and psychological risks of return that can really significantly move the needle in terms of the numbers of people that will eventually return to Ukraine. So that's the type of thing that we're talking to the government about, the types of programs that they can put into place that can encourage return when the time is right. But even in the most optimistic of scenarios, the reality is that the country will face some demographic challenges and some labor market shortages. And taking into account what Eric was saying as well with automation and potential increases in productivity, Ministry of Economy has run the numbers, ILO has run the numbers, and even if we see significant increases in productivity growth beyond what Ukraine has seen historically, there's still going to be a significant need for more workers in the labor market. So in terms of what we're doing, we're working closely with the, sorry, I use acronyms all the time, International Labor Organization, ILO, and the Ministry of Economy and others to see how we can prepare Ukraine to effectively govern potentially larger scale labor migration into the country as part of reconstruction and economic recovery. This is a reality that most governments sort of shy from, but the government of Ukraine has actually been quite open to, recognizing that this is a needed tool in the toolbox to address demographic challenges. But in looking at this, I mean, especially in a country like Ukraine that doesn't previously have a history of immigration programs on a large scale, there are a number of factors that we're looking at with the government. First of all, how do you develop labor market assessment systems so that your labor migration system is bringing in the types of workers that you actually need and is having a net positive effect on working conditions and on salaries? How do you protect migrant workers who are here from exploitation and abuse, which is always a key issue in recruitment and employment? And then, of course, the social dynamics of it. How do you address, how do you prepare people who aren't used to having foreign people in their community to deal with the new reality of foreign workers living and working next to them? So these are the types of things that we're looking at. I think there are a number of examples of labor migration programming in post-war reconstruction that haven't gone so well. I mean, the famous Turkish immigrants to Germany in post-war Germany, post-war reconstruction in Iraq, where we saw large-scale exploitation of foreign workers. Sorry, I'm cat sitting for a friend, and he's very friendly. And what we're really trying to do is work with the Ukrainian government now to get the structures in place so that they don't face the same issues that we saw in Germany and we saw in Iraq, to be able to govern post-war labor migration effectively. So we're currently looking at all these types of issues of what will be needed, what are the capacity issues at the national level and the local issue, so that the government can get the sort of migration, the labor migration balance right, so that it fits well into post-war reconstruction and recovery. Great.
So a lot of pre-planning there. Thank you for that, and I hope the cat is okay. We have a lot of questions coming in the Q&A box, so I'll turn to that now. And again, if you have a question, please feel free to put it in there. Eric, there's one here for you, and they write, have you seen progress, or what kinds of progress have you seen towards profitable and sustainable engagement with the private sector as covered in the Ukraine Recovery Conference in London?
Yeah, so there is another Ukraine Recovery Conference coming up I think it's in Berlin this year. And I was at the one in London, and personally, I would have liked to see a bit more engagement of Ukrainians' dynamic SME community, and more of a demonstration of a full cycle and full investment cycle. That is a small Ukrainian company that had foreign investment come in, grew to some amount, and then had the foreign investor exit the company. That to me is really what, if I'm an investor looking in, a long-term investor, 7-10 years, I want that type of demonstrable success story. And I think that for the next Ukraine Recovery Conference, that if the Ukrainian government and the partner government hosting can show some of those successes and to whet the palate of investors, see like, oh, this has been done before. There is I'm not going to be the first person into this market. There are possibilities here. I think that that's a great way to do it. Nothing demonstrates success like success, right? So it is a recursive or a positive sum opportunity. Now, in Ukraine, you have a great investor in Horizon Capital, and Elena Kazarny. She just closed a $250 million fund during wartime. That's great, but Ukraine is a big country and it needs 12 Lenas, because there is such a need for deal flow. And I think that there's an opportunity here for different risk appetites of investors going into Ukraine to take different pieces of deals. And I think that this is really where the private sector and private investors within Europe and OECD countries writ large have an opportunity. And there was a second question down there about corruption. And so my answer to that would be to get more people more foreign investors into Ukraine to root out corruption, because you have more competition, you have more eyes on the ball. Nothing, having, worked with folks, on Wall Street, nothing gets people more incensed, because they have a responsibility to invest those people's monies, right, responsibly, and to get that money back. And if they're not getting the return back and they can't keep track of the money on the ground, they're going to be knocking at every door in Kiev, and Tetyana's door included. And I would also add that you have organizations in Ukraine like the Business Ombudsman's Office, but you also have associations across the country that are committed to ethical business practices, integrity. You have willing and able embassies in Kiev that are actively encouraging investment, protecting investors, making sure that the deals are honored. So there are multiple avenues in Ukraine if you're gonna go in. make sure that, stuff is done the way it's supposed to be done.
That's great. It's almost like herd immunity for investors or something. If you can get enough of them in, it's safety in numbers. That's great. I'm going to follow up on that and turn to you, Tetyana, and then maybe back to you, Eric, to talk a little bit about the corruption piece, because we are getting quite a few questions in the chat about that. And so, Tetyana, I'd love to just hear from you. What your response is, and what are you seeing in terms of trends in fighting against corruption? And I just want to make sure I can get a lot of the different aspects of the questions that are in here. But well, why don't we start there? And and what are you doing in terms of protecting investors regarding corruption?
Oh, well, unfortunately, Ukraine well known as a stereotype that Ukraine is a corrupted country. But being on this position for more than 8 years, I could definitely prove you that the level of these stereotypes should be significantly decreased. Yes, and it's over-evaluated the level of corruption in Ukraine. However, what is the real problem in Ukraine? It's law implementation. Terminology, it's called like law enforcement, but practically it's not like enforcement, but more like law implementation, law practical usage by state authorities. Because when they have discretion, they use as a rule not the lightest approach, yes, but the most hardest approach with fees or sanctions or something like that. And this is an issue. It's we should work on the change in behavior more than just discussion root corruption. For sure, we have probably the most developed anti-corruption system in the world. Yes, we have so many anti-corruption bodies. Some of them works better, some of them less good. Yes, but at the same time, the system is quite strict. And international society and international organizations like Michael's organizations, of such type of partners, they are helping to polish in this system, and it's normal. Yes, we are working on improving the system. But as for the business environment, yes, there are some cases, of course. Recently, we had like explosion of discussion around the business environment in Ukraine, and even in the presidential office, they addressed it, establishing a special council from key businessmen. Yes, by the way, we already, as a Business Ombudsman Council, we already have our cooperation with this group, and also as an integrated platform will be a complaints management system for them also. So through certain channel. Well, but summing up, I would tell to our audience here that Ukraine will continue fighting with the corruption and will continue polishing our behavior, business behavior, because we definitely would like to move towards the European Union regarding the values, first of all. Yes, we are part of the civilized world, and we will continue working on the improving business ethics, business environment. As Eric mentioned, we have already critical mass of interest sons, yes, in this area. It's important. As for the economy, I can't miss it. Yes, for the future, I can't but agree with Michael regarding the soft migration policy. We need more people, and we should work on it. We need host or invite for living, yes, for migration, people from other countries and other cultures as well. But we also should change the structure of our economy. Facing these challenges with the grain and the border with Poland and other countries, it's a good time to review our economic system and put all our efforts to the structured reform. change structure, not commodities. Yes, we shouldn't sell commodities. We should process, have like reprocessing of these commodities and producing goods from these commodities. And I believe that Ukraine after the war will be like the new America. Yes, with the free trade, yes, and more opportunities, open our doors for people from all over the world, really, for competition, entrepreneurs, and the new opportunities. And I believe that many people could find a good life in our country, and we all will build better economy and better future for Ukraine and for this region in general.
Thank you. Michael, we have a question here. Well, someone's asking about whether you've seen any changes in the openness and cooperation of neighboring countries to the needs of Ukraine's refugees over the past 2 years of war.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, IOM's got a lot of operations in countries that that are hosting Ukrainian refugees. I'm not directly involved in it, so I'm not sure I'm best placed to answer it. But there are a number of surveys that are done to sort of assess the level of welcomeness, I guess, over time to Ukrainian refugees. It was historically high from the beginning when you compare it to other types of forced migration that have happened. There are a variety of reasons for why I think Ukrainians were welcomed with such open arms, compared to, say, the Syrian populations and others that had come to Europe. A variety of good reasons and not so good reasons. But I think overall what we've seen is that the sentiment is still largely very positive. On the political level, with a few exceptions, it's very positive, with the few exceptions being, as I think Eric and Tetyana were pointing to, these economic issues that crop up about exports and access of Ukrainian truckers to EU markets and that sort of thing, because there are specific groups within Europe that rightly see economic threats from Ukrainian integration into the EU, as Eric was saying, but even in terms of the status that they now have and the accessibility that they now have to Europe. So you do get these protests that pop up, and you do get problems at the borders, particularly with Ukraine and Poland. But the overall sentiment of the general population, I would say, is still extremely strong in terms of welcoming Ukrainians.
Thank you for that. Eric, we have a question here about corrosive capital, and how that can adversely affect Ukrainian SMEs. And just to latch onto that, is that, I mean, we're thinking a lot about, we're talking a lot about private investment, and I think, I'm thinking about it, from the very US centric standpoint, but clearly it's not just the US, there's European countries, but there are countries from around the world. And so what is corrosive capital, and do you also see that coming into Ukraine?
So yeah, corrosive capital is a concept that we developed here at CIPE over the past 10 years ago. That's working with our business association partners in emerging markets around the world. And they were seeing large investments come in, but not necessarily benefiting the local business community. So they were coming in, they are coming in an opaque manner. They're not necessarily profit oriented, and they're really kind of undercutting accountability standards. So they're not complying with local labor. They're not seek to circumvent environmental regulations. This is a lot of like state to state, state of enterprise. You see this in the Balkans, in the case of Serbia, where, if there's an SOE doing business with an SOE between two states, in Serbia, it's classified as a national security secret, right? So the private sector really doesn't like that, because you're not allowing that information to get out there. It also allows the government to kind of cut deals with select SOEs abroad, and it leads to kind of undermining, improvements in both market and democratic standards in the country, and increased transparency and accountability, which, to Tetyana's point, Ukraine has made tremendous progress on really all fronts. My message to American investors would be that if you're comfortable doing business in Mexico, and if you are investing in Mexico, there's absolutely no reason for you not to invest in Ukraine. Because if you look at the scores on transparency and the ability to kind of work things out via entities like the Business Ombudsman's Office, the risk, is no less, if not higher, in Mexico in some instances. And look, there are a lot of American businesses invested in Mexico, and a lot of investment funds invested there. So with corrosive capital, coming back to that, is a lot on business culture, and we at CIPE have focused a lot on that. So that's increasing corporate governance standards. That's instituting registries of independent directors, qualified independent directors, for local governance organizations, of professional associations of corporate secretaries. So you raise this corporate civil society, and personally being in and out of Ukraine for 2 decades now, it is night and day. In terms of the Ukrainian business mentality. And you had this post-Soviet hangover. The hangover's over, especially now with the full-scale war. You're no longer hungover. You have a gun in your hand. You have full capability of facilities, and you realize who you are, right? And so the Ukrainian business community is really coming into its own, and through the trauma of this war, will have its own identity, just as doing business in France has its identity, in Germany and the United States. And so the Ukrainian way of doing business is it's high tech, it's savvy, it's, to Tetyana's point, getting stuff done as quickly as possible and my American is coming out with as little BS as possible, and straight to the point. It's very refreshing. After working on other markets around the world, that I find somebody that speaks American in Ukraine. The whole civil society movement has really kind of made an impact on the business community and business culture in the country. And it's really something to be, to my mind, taken notice of and rewarded. One of my favorite sayings in Ukraine is, 2 Ukrainians, 3 hitmen, right? So 2 Ukrainians, 3 leaders, where you constantly have Ukrainians wanting to take the lead. And it's really refreshing from an investor's perspective, or from a perspective of someone that's doing business with someone really far away geographically, to have somebody that's willing to take the lead and to take the risk. And that, to me, is really where Ukrainian business culture is going, and should be recognized and rewarded by investors.
Great, thank you. In the couple minutes that we have remaining, I'd love to just do one quick lightning round for all of you. I'll start with you, Tetyana, and then Michael and Eric. But what is the one thing that you would most want to see right now to move reconstruction efforts forward? Tetyana, I'll start with you.
Clear priorities and clear priorities of the government regarding the reconstruction. It will help all of us to focus and put all our efforts helping to overcome consequences of these war, for early consequences.
Thank you. Michael.
Yeah, I'm just looking at part of my portfolio. It would be looking at diaspora engagement. Ukraine has a massive and really well organized diaspora, not historically great relations with the government, but I think now is a chance for really change, and for the government to put in place policies and programs that embrace the diaspora as a real contributor to economic recovery and reconstruction.
Perfect. And Eric.
Cessation of hostilities and a return to 1991 borders. That's number one, to be pithy. But seriously, business tours and getting corporate executives and C-suite executives and investors into Ukraine to be on the ground, to look around, to meet Ukrainian entrepreneurs and to see what they're doing in person. It'll change your worldview about what's going on in Ukraine.
All right, excellent. All great things to look for. Thank you to the three of you for your insights, for the work that you're doing. It really makes a difference to hear from people who are so close to these issues. So really appreciate it. Just a few housekeeping notes. Our next discussion for those who are in New York is actually tomorrow night. So we'll be talking in person with Amy Myers-Jaffe about energy security in a time of conflict. So if you're in New York and you're interested in learning more, you can. And our next virtual briefing is whether the U.S. is ready to support multiple conflicts. And so that will be on Wednesday, March 6th. You can RSVP there. And as a final reminder to everyone listening, we are a nonprofit. We need to fundraise to keep these briefings free and open to everyone around the world. We have our gala at the end of April. Michael Froman, who's the current president of the Council on Foreign Relations, will be our keynote conversation, and we will be honoring a few great people who are working in international affairs as well. So it should be a really fun evening. Please buy tickets, please donate and support our work. And thank you, all of you, for joining us today to listen, and especially to Eric, Tetyana, and Michael for your great insights. Thank you very, very much, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.